Sarah Martinez was replacing targets at the 500-yard line when the argument erupted behind her. A group of Navy SEALs had been training all morning, and their newest member, Rodriguez, was failing miserably at long-range shots that should have been routine. "I'm telling you, something's wrong with this rifle," Rodriguez insisted, frustration evident in his voice. His team leader, Chief Petty Officer Jake Sullivan, was losing patience. Sarah had watched Rodriguez's form for the past hour. His breathing was erratic, his grip inconsistent, and he was jerking the trigger like he was trying to ring a doorbell. When Rodriguez threw down the rifle in anger, declaring the weapon was completely screwed up, Sarah found herself speaking before she could stop herself. "The rifle's fine. You're pulling your shots left because you're anticipating recoil." The entire SEAL team turned to stare at the 23-year-old college student who just critiqued a Navy special operator. The morning had started like any other for Sarah. She'd arrived at the Oceanside shooting range at 6 a.m., an hour before opening, to prepare for what her supervisor warned would be a busy day. The Navy had booked the entire long-range section for special operations training, which meant Sarah would spend most of her time running targets back and forth while trying to stay invisible. She'd learned early in her 8 months on the job that military customers preferred their range staff to be seen and not heard. Sarah had taken the job out of necessity rather than passion. Nursing school was expensive, and her father's disability pension from his Marine Corps service only stretched so far. The range work paid better than most part-time jobs available to students, and the flexible hours allowed her to attend classes. What she hadn't expected was how much she'd learned just by observing. Every day brought different shooters with varying skill levels, and Sarah found herself unconsciously cataloging their techniques, noting what worked and what didn't. Her father, Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Martinez, had taught her to shoot when she was 12, but it was more about safety and basic marksmanship than advanced techniques. "Shooting is like surgery," he told her during one of their weekend range sessions. "It requires patience, precision, and the ability to control your body under pressure." Those words had stuck with her, especially as she watched countless shooters struggle with fundamentals they should have mastered years ago. The SEALs had arrived just after 7 a.m. in 2 black SUVs, their gear bags and rifle cases suggesting they planned to stay all day. Sarah recognized the type immediately: quiet professionals who moved with purpose and spoke in the economical language of people accustomed to high-stakes situations. Jake Sullivan stood out as their leader, not because he was the loudest or most imposing, but because the others naturally deferred to his judgment. Rodriguez was different. Younger than the rest, he carried himself with the swagger of someone trying to prove he belonged. Sarah had seen the type before, usually civilian shooters who'd watched too many action movies and thought marksmanship was about looking cool rather than mastering fundamentals. But Rodriguez wasn't a civilian. He was a Navy SEAL, which made his poor performance all the more puzzling. From her position at the target line, Sarah had a perfect view of the firing positions. She watched Rodriguez settle behind his rifle, noting immediately that his body position was all wrong. His left elbow was too far under the rifle, creating an unstable platform. His cheek weld was inconsistent, meaning his eye alignment with the scope changed with each shot. Most critically, she could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his trigger finger moved in a jerky, slapping motion rather than the smooth, straight-back squeeze her father had drilled into her. The first few shots confirmed her assessment. Even with a high-quality rifle and match-grade ammunition, Rodriguez's shots were scattered across the target like a shotgun pattern. Each miss seemed to increase his frustration, which only made his technique worse. Sarah found herself mentally coaching him, wishing she could offer the simple corrections that would transform his shooting. "Breathe through your shots," she whispered to herself, watching Rodriguez hold his breath for impossibly long periods. Relax your grip. Follow through. But Rodriguez couldn't hear her silent advice, and his teammates seemed more interested in ribbing him about his poor performance than offering constructive help. Jake Sullivan was different. Sarah noticed him studying Rodriguez's form with the analytical eye of someone who understood the mechanics of marksmanship. She could see him making mental notes, probably planning to address the issues during their debrief. But Rodriguez's ego was getting in the way of learning, and his insistence that the equipment was faulty was preventing any real progress. When Rodriguez finally exploded in frustration, throwing down the rifle and cursing the weapon, Sarah felt her father's training kick in. Miguel Martinez had never tolerated excuses or blame shifting. A craftsman never blames his tools, he'd say whenever Sarah complained about her rifle's performance. Master yourself first, then worry about equipment. The words left her mouth before her brain could engage the filter that usually kept her quiet around military customers. In that moment, she wasn't a part-time range employee trying to stay invisible. She was Miguel Martinez's daughter, someone who'd been raised to speak truth even when it was uncomfortable. The silence that followed her observation felt like it lasted forever, but Sarah knew there was no taking back what she'd said. She'd just challenged a Navy SEAL's competence in front of his teammates, and now she'd have to face the consequences. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Jake stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Sarah. "You think you can do better?" he asked, his tone carrying both skepticism and curiosity. Rodriguez scoffed, but Jake held up a hand to silence him. Sarah's heart pounded as she realized what she'd gotten herself into, but her father's voice echoed in her mind. "Never make a claim you can't back up." She nodded, and Jake picked up the rifle Rodriguez had abandoned. "Tell you what," Jake said, checking the chamber and handing her the weapon. "Rodriguez has been trying to hit that target all morning. You make the shot, and I'll buy lunch for everyone here. You miss, and you explain to my commanding officer why a civilian was handling military weapons." The other SEALs gathered around, some smirking, others genuinely curious. Sarah accepted the rifle, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The weight of the rifle surprised her. It was heavier than her father's hunting rifle, with a different balance point and a scope that felt foreign under her cheek. Sarah ran her hands along the weapon, familiarizing herself with its contours while trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. The other SEALs had formed a loose semicircle behind the firing line, their conversation dying. As they realized, Jake was serious about letting a range employee handle their equipment. "This is insane," Rodriguez muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's a college kid who changes targets for a living. What's she gonna teach us about shooting?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but Jake's steady gaze kept her focused. There was something in his expression that suggested this wasn't just about proving a point to Rodriguez. He was genuinely curious about what she might be capable of, and that realization both terrified and motivated her. "What's your background?" Jake asked, his voice neutral but probing. "Military family?" "My father's a retired Marine gunnery sergeant," Sarah replied, checking the rifle's safety and action with practiced movements. "He taught me to shoot when I was 12. We've been going to the range together every weekend for the past 11 years. One of the other SEALs, a lean man with graying temples, whistled softly. "Gunny Martinez? Miguel Martinez?" Sarah's head snapped up in surprise. "You know my father?" "Know of him," the SEAL replied with newfound respect. "He was an instructor at the Scout Sniper School before his injury. Legendary reputation for turning average Marines into precision shooters. If you're his daughter, maybe this isn't as crazy as it sounds." The revelation changed the atmosphere immediately. Rodriguez's smirk faded, and even the skeptical SEALs began paying closer attention. Sarah felt a surge of pride mixed with pressure. Her father's reputation was now on the line, along with her own. Jake gestured toward the 500-yard target that had been frustrating Rodriguez all morning. Same target, same conditions. Winds running about 5 to 7 miles per hour from the left. You've got match-grade 168-grain ammunition, and the rifle zeroed at 100 yards. He paused, studying her face. You sure about this? Sarah nodded, though her mouth had gone dry. She'd made similar shots countless times with her father, but never under this kind of scrutiny. The range suddenly felt like a stage, with 8 elite warriors as her audience and her credibility as the performance. Before I shoot, Sarah said, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded, can I show you what Rodriguez was doing? Wrong? It might help him understand why he was missing. Rodriguez started to protest, but Jake cut him off with a sharp look. Go ahead. Sarah moved to the shooting position Rodriguez had vacated, settling behind the rifle, but not yet taking. Aim. First issue is body position, she began, demonstrating Rodriguez's stance. He was putting too much weight on his left elbow, creating an unstable platform. Watch what happens when I shift my weight. She adjusted her position, showing how proper bone support created a more stable shooting platform. Second problem was grip pressure, she continued, wrapping her hands around the rifle. He was death gripping the weapon, which transfers muscle tension through the stock and throws off natural point of aim. The grip should be firm but relaxed, like holding a bird. Tight enough that it can't fly away, gentle enough that you don't. Heard it. The SEALs exchanged glances, clearly impressed by her technical knowledge and teaching ability. Even Rodriguez was paying attention now, his defensive posture softening as he recognized the validity of her observations. The biggest issue was trigger control, Sarah said, placing her finger on the trigger. He was slapping it like he was, trying to surprise himself. Proper trigger control is about steady, straight back pressure with follow-through. You should be surprised when the rifle fires, but not because you jerked the trigger. Jake nodded approvingly. Textbook explanation. Now let's see if you can execute what you're teaching. Sarah settled into her final shooting position, making minute adjustments until everything felt right. The rifle scope was clearer than what she was used to, and the target seemed to leap into sharp focus. She could feel the wind on her left cheek, noting its consistency and estimating the correction needed. One more thing, she said, glancing back at Rodriguez. You were holding your breath too long. That creates muscle tension and makes your heart rate spike. Natural respiratory pause. Breathe normally. Exhale halfway, then hold for the shot. Your body will be relaxed and your heart rate steady. She demonstrated the breathing technique, feeling her pulse slow as she found her natural pause. The crosshairs settled on the target, and Sarah began her trigger press, applying steady pressure while maintaining perfect sight alignment. The moment felt suspended in time. 8 pairs of eyes watched her every movement, and Sarah could almost feel the weight of their expectations. Her father's training took over, years of weekend practice sessions condensing into this single moment. The trigger broke cleanly, surprising her just as it should, and the rifle recoiled straight back into her shoulder. Through the scope, Sarah watched the bullet's impact, a small puff of dust appearing exactly where she'd aimed. But she wasn't done yet. Without lifting her head from the scope, she worked the bolt smoothly, chambered another round, and settled back into position. The second shot followed the first, then a third, each one placed with deliberate precision. When she finally lifted her head from the scope, the range was completely silent except for the distant sound of waves against the cliffs. Jake was studying the target through his spotting scope, his expression unreadable. Finally, he lowered the scope and looked at Sarah with something approaching awe. 3 shots, 2-inch group, dead center, he announced to the team. That's better shooting than most of us managed this morning. Sarah settled into position, feeling the weight of 8 pairs of eyes on her back. She'd made this shot hundreds of times with her father's rifle, but never with an audience of elite warriors questioning her every move. Taking a deep breath, she adjusted her position, checked the wind flags, and settled the crosshairs on the target. The range fell silent, except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the nearby cliffs. Sarah controlled her breathing, found her natural respiratory pause, and squeezed the trigger with steady, even pressure. The rifle cracked, and through the spotting scope, Jake watched the bullet punch through the exact center of the target. "Holy shit," Rodriguez whispered, but Sarah wasn't done. Without a word, she worked the bolt, chambered another round, and fired again. Then again. 3 shots, 3 perfect hits, all within a 2-inch group. Jake lowered his binoculars and looked at Sarah with new respect. "Where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" The aftermath of her shooting demonstration created an electric tension on the range. Sarah carefully safed the rifle and handed it back to Jake, her hands trembling slightly now that the adrenaline was wearing off. She'd just outperformed a Navy SEAL in front of his entire team, and the implications of that achievement were beginning to sink in. Rodriguez stared at the target in disbelief, then back at Sarah. "That's impossible," he muttered. "Nobody shoots that well on their first try with an unfamiliar rifle." "It's not her first try," Jake said quietly, still studying Sarah with calculating eyes. "This is someone who's been shooting seriously for years. The question is, why are you working at a range instead of competing professionally?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I'm in nursing school. This is just a part-time job to pay for tuition. I never thought about competing or anything like that." The SEAL with graying temples, who'd introduced himself as Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, stepped forward. "Your father never mentioned you could shoot like this." "He knows I'm decent," Sarah replied, downplaying her abilities out of habit. "But we just shoot for fun on weekends. Nothing serious." Webb exchanged a meaningful look with Jake. "Ma'am, what you just did isn't decent. That's expert-level marksmanship under pressure. Most people would have choked with this many people." Watching, the praise made Sarah uncomfortable. She'd grown up in a household where competence was expected, not celebrated. Her father had always emphasized that shooting well was simply a matter of applying proper fundamentals consistently. The idea that her performance was exceptional felt foreign. "Can you do it again?" Rodriguez asked, his earlier hostility replaced by genuine curiosity. "I mean, maybe that was just luck." Jake held up a hand before Sarah could respond. "Rodriguez, stand down. She's already proven her point." He turned to Sarah with a thoughtful expression. "But I am curious about something. You diagnosed Rodriguez's problems just by watching him shoot. That suggests you understand not just how to shoot, but how to teach it. Where did that come from?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I've been watching people shoot here for 8 months. You start to see patterns, the same mistakes over and over. My father always said that teaching someone to shoot well is harder than shooting well yourself, because you have to understand why things go wrong, not just how to do them right." "Smart man, your father," Webb observed. "And he obviously raised a smart daughter." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another vehicle, a black sedan that pulled up to the range office. A man in navy dress blues emerged, his bearing and the deference shown by the SEALs indicating significant rank. "That's Commander Harrison," Jake said quietly to Sarah. "Our CO. He's probably here to check on our training progress." Sarah felt a spike of anxiety. She was still holding a military rifle, having just demonstrated shooting skills that had impressed a team of special operators. The situation suddenly felt much more complicated than a simple range demonstration. Commander Harrison approached the group, his eyes taking in the scene with practiced assessment. "Chief Sullivan, how's the training progressing?" "Very well, sir," Jake replied. "We've actually had some unexpected assistance from one of the range staff. This is Sarah Martinez. Her father is Gunnery Sergeant Miguel Martinez, formerly of the Scout Sniper School." The commander's eyebrows rose slightly. "Martinez, I know that name. Excellent instructor before his injury." He studied Sarah with new interest. "And what kind of assistance have you been providing, Miss Martinez?" Sarah felt the weight of command attention and struggled to find her voice. Jake stepped in smoothly. She identified some fundamental issues with Rodriguez's shooting technique and provided expert-level coaching. Then she demonstrated proper form with a 3-shot group that would qualify for our advanced marksmanship standards. Commander Harrison's expression shifted from polite interest to genuine attention. "Is that so? And what's your background, Miss Martinez?" "I'm a nursing student, sir," Sarah replied, finding her voice. "I work here part-time and shoot recreationally with my father." "Recreationally," the commander repeated, a hint of amusement in his voice. He walked over to the spotting scope and examined Sarah's target. After a long moment, he returned to the group. "Miss Martinez, that's not recreational shooting. That's precision marksmanship at a level that would qualify you for military competition teams." The praise felt surreal. Sarah had always thought of herself as a decent shooter who'd learned from her father, nothing more. The idea that her skills might have broader applications had never seriously occurred to her. "Sir," Jake interjected, "with your permission, I'd like to invite Miss Martinez to observe some of our advanced training sessions. Her ability to diagnose and correct shooting problems could be valuable for our newer team members." Sarah's heart raced. The opportunity to learn from elite military operators was beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd spoken up about Rodriguez's technique. But it also felt overwhelming. She was just a college student trying to pay for school, not someone qualified to train Navy SEALs. Commander Harrison considered the request carefully. "Miss Martinez, would you be interested in such an arrangement? It would be unofficial, of course, but we're always looking for ways to improve our training effectiveness." Sarah looked around at the faces watching her. Jake's encouraging expression, Webb's respectful attention, even Rodriguez's newfound interest. These were some of the most elite warriors in the world, and they were asking for her help. The scared part of her wanted to decline, to return to the safety of her routine job changing targets and sweeping brass. But her father's voice echoed in her mind. "When opportunity knocks, you better be ready to answer the door." "Yes, sir," she heard herself saying. "I'd be honored to help however I can." Commander Harrison nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Chief Sullivan will coordinate with your supervisor about scheduling." "And Miss Martinez?" He paused, fixing her with a steady gaze. "Don't underestimate what you've accomplished here today. Talent like yours doesn't come along often." As the commander walked away, Sarah realized her life had just taken an unexpected turn. What had started as a simple correction to a frustrated SEAL's technique had evolved into something much larger. She was no longer just Sarah Martinez, the nursing student who worked at a shooting range. She was someone whose skills had been recognized by the Navy's elite, and that recognition was about to open doors she'd never imagined existed. Sarah's reputation grew beyond the local range when Jake recommended her for a civilian marksmanship instructor position with a military contractor. The job offered better pay, flexible hours around her nursing studies, and the opportunity to work with various military units. Her father was proud, but not surprised. He'd always known she had the focus and patience for precision shooting. 6 months later, Sarah found herself training not just Navy SEALs, but Marines, Army Rangers, and law enforcement officers. She completed her nursing degree while building a second career she never expected. The shy range assistant had discovered that sometimes the most significant opportunities come from simply being observant, helpful, and ready when someone hands you a chance to prove yourself. The transformation didn't happen overnight. In the weeks following her demonstration with the SEALs, Sarah found herself caught between two worlds: her familiar routine as a nursing student and part-time range employee, and the exciting but intimidating prospect of working with elite military units. Jake had been true to his word, arranging for her to observe several advanced training sessions where she quietly watched and learned, occasionally offering insights when asked. The breakthrough came during a particularly challenging session with a group of Marine Scout snipers who were struggling with long-range wind reading. Sarah had been observing from the sidelines when she noticed something the instructors had missed: a subtle wind pattern created by the range's topography that was affecting bullet trajectory in ways the standard wind flags weren't indicating. When she hesitantly mentioned her observation to Jake, he immediately called for a training halt and asked her to explain what she was seeing. Standing before a group of hardened Marines, Sarah felt her old nervousness return. But as she began explaining the wind patterns, pointing out the visual indicators she'd learned to read from years of shooting with her father in various conditions, her confidence grew. The Marines listened intently, and when they applied her corrections, their accuracy improved dramatically. Word of the range girl who could read wind like a weather map spread quickly through the military training community. Commander Harrison had been present during that session, and afterward, he pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Miss Martinez, I've been watching your progress over the past month. You have a rare combination of technical knowledge, teaching ability, and situational awareness that's frankly wasted on target replacement duty. Have you ever considered making this a career?" Sarah's first instinct was to deflect. "I'm committed to finishing nursing school, sir. This is just something I do on the side." "I'm not asking you to abandon your education," Harrison replied. "But there are opportunities in the civilian contractor world that might interest you. Companies that provide specialized training to military and law enforcement units. The pay is excellent, the work is meaningful, and the schedule could accommodate your academic commitments." That conversation led to a meeting with Rebecca Chun, a former Army officer who now ran Precision Training Solutions, a contractor specializing in advanced marksmanship instruction. Rebecca had heard about Sarah through military channels and was intrigued by reports of her unconventional background and natural teaching ability. "Most of our instructors come from military sniper backgrounds," Rebecca explained during their interview. "They're technically excellent, but sometimes struggle to communicate with students who don't share their experience base. You have a different perspective. You learned as a civilian. You understand the fundamentals from the ground up, and you've demonstrated an ability to diagnose and correct problems that even experienced shooters miss." The job offer was compelling: triple her current range salary, flexible scheduling around her class commitments, opportunities to travel and work with different units, and comprehensive training in advanced marksmanship techniques. But what sealed Sarah's decision was Rebecca's final comment: "We're not just looking for another instructor. We're looking for someone who can help us develop new training methodologies, someone who thinks differently about how to teach precision shooting." Sarah's father had been characteristically direct when she called to discuss the opportunity. "Mia, you've been given a gift, not just the ability to shoot well, but the ability to help others shoot well. That's rare. If you don't use it, you're wasting something precious." Her first official assignment came 2 months later, a week-long course for a mixed group of military and law enforcement snipers at a training facility in Virginia. Sarah arrived nervous but determined, carrying lesson plans she'd developed. With Rebecca's guidance and equipment she was still learning to use. The students ranged from experienced military snipers looking to refine their skills to police officers taking their first advanced marksmanship course. The week started roughly. Several of the military students were skeptical about learning from someone who'd never served, and Sarah could feel their resistance during her initial presentations. But as the training progressed and her methods proved effective, attitudes began to shift. Her approach was different from traditional military instruction, more analytical, more focused on understanding the why behind each technique rather than simply drilling repetition. The turning point came on the fourth day, when a veteran Marine sniper who'd been openly dismissive of Sarah's methods found himself struggling with a particularly challenging shot sequence. After watching him fail repeatedly, Sarah approached and quietly suggested a modification to his shooting position based on his body mechanics. The adjustment worked immediately, and his accuracy improved dramatically. "How did you see that?" he asked afterward, genuine curiosity replacing his earlier skepticism. "I've been watching people shoot for over a year now," Sarah replied. "Everyone's body is different, and sometimes the textbook position isn't optimal for a particular shooter. You have longer arms than average, so the standard position was creating tension in your shoulders. The modification accommodated your natural build." That evening, the same Marine approached her privately. "I owe you an apology. I thought you were just some civilian who got lucky with a few good shots. But you understand this stuff at a level most instructors never reach. Where did you really learn all this?" Sarah smiled, thinking of her father and the countless weekend range sessions that had seemed so ordinary at the time. From watching, listening, and trying to understand why things work the way they do. "My father always said that shooting is just applied physics and psychology. If you understand both, you can help anyone improve." By the end of the week, Sarah had not only won over her skeptical students, but had also identified several areas where traditional training methods could be improved. Her after-action report to Rebecca was filled with observations and recommendations that would eventually influence how precision training solutions approached instruction. 6 months into her new career, Sarah found herself in situations she could never have imagined. She'd trained FBI hostage rescue teams in urban precision shooting, worked with Army Rangers on advanced ballistics calculations, and even consulted with Olympic shooting coaches on mental preparation techniques. Each assignment taught her something new and reinforced her growing confidence in her abilities. The financial impact was transformative. Sarah was able to pay off her student loans early, help her father with some overdue medical bills, and even start saving for the future. But more importantly, she'd found work that felt meaningful. Every student who improved under her guidance, every technique she helped refine, every problem she solved contributed to the effectiveness of people whose jobs involved protecting others. Her nursing degree remained important to her, and she completed it on schedule despite her demanding travel schedule. But as graduation approached, Sarah realized she was no longer planning to work in a hospital. She'd found her calling in an unexpected place, teaching skills that could mean the difference between life and death for the people she trained. The shy range assistant, who'd once been afraid to speak up, had become Sarah Martinez, precision marksmanship instructor and consultant. She'd discovered that expertise could come from unexpected places, that teaching was as much about understanding people as understanding techniques, and that sometimes the most important career decisions were made not in boardrooms or guidance counselor offices, but on shooting ranges where someone handed you a rifle and stepped aside to see what you could do. Looking back, Sarah often marveled at how a single moment of speaking up had changed everything. If she'd kept quiet that morning, if she'd let Rodriguez continue blaming his equipment, if she'd been too intimidated to accept Jake's challenge, she'd still be changing targets and sweeping brass. Instead, she'd built a career that combined her natural abilities with her desire to help others, proving that sometimes the most significant opportunities come disguised as simple moments when someone asks, "If you think you can do better,